The city lights flickered like distant stars as the car sped down the empty highway. Inside, the air was thick with tension, the kind that makes your heart race and your palms sweat. She stared out the window, her reflection barely visible in the glass. Her mind was a storm of guilt, longing, and something she hadn't felt in years, aliveness. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to be here, in this car, with him. But here she was, on the edge of a decision that would change everything. "Do you ever wonder what would happen if we got caught?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because deep down, she already knew the answer. This was the night she crossed a line she could never uncross. This was the night she betrayed the man she vowed to love forever. And this was just the beginning. On the surface, Clara Bennett's life was the picture of perfection. At 37, she lived in the quaint town of Willowbrook, nestled in the rolling hills of Vermont. She was married to Daniel, a kind, hard-working man who had been her rock for 14 years. Together, they had 2 children, Sophie, 10, and Liam, 7, a golden retriever named Buddy, and a charming colonial house with a wraparound porch. To anyone looking in, Clara had it all. But beneath the polished exterior, her marriage was a shadow of what it once was. Daniel was a good man, but over the years, their relationship had become routine. They were more like roommates than lovers, sharing responsibilities but not intimacy. The spark that once set Clara's heart ablaze had dimmed to a faint ember. She loved Daniel, but she missed the passion, the connection, the feeling of being truly seen. Then came the summer of 2023, and everything changed. It started innocently enough. Clara had taken the kids to school and stopped by her favorite cafe, the Rustic Bean, for her usual latte. The place was bustling, and as she waited in line, she felt someone's eyes on her. "Busy morning, huh?" a voice said, warm and inviting. She turned and saw him, Ethan. He was tall, with dark hair streaked with silver, and a smile that could disarm anyone. He was dressed casually in a button-down shirt and jeans, but there was something about him that made him stand out. "Yeah, seems like everyone had the same idea," Clara replied, offering a polite smile. They struck up a conversation, small talk at first, but there was an ease to it that felt refreshing. Ethan introduced himself as a freelance photographer who had recently moved to Willowbrook after a divorce. Clara mentioned her husband and kids, almost as if to remind herself of the boundaries that existed. "Nice to meet you, Clara," Ethan said, his eyes lingering on hers just a moment too long. "Maybe I'll see you around." That should have been the end of it. A fleeting moment with a stranger. But it wasn't. The following week, Clara saw Ethan again at the cafe. This time, he waved her over to his table. She hesitated, but something compelled her to sit down. They talked for nearly an hour, laughing and sharing stories. Ethan had a way of making her feel seen, like she was more than just a wife and mother. It was intoxicating. What started as casual conversations at the cafe soon became a routine. Every Thursday morning, they would meet, and for 1 hour, Clara felt like a different version of herself, someone lighter, freer, more alive. She told herself it was harmless, but deep down, she knew better. One evening, Ethan texted her. They had never exchanged numbers, but he must have found her through the local community directory. The message was simple. "Would you like to grab dinner sometime?" Outside the cafe, Clara stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She knew what this meant. A part of her wanted to delete the message and pretend it never happened. But another part, a louder, more restless part, told her to say yes. And she did. That Friday night, Clara told Daniel she had a work event. It wasn't the first time she'd lied to him, but this lie felt heavier, more dangerous. Ethan picked her up at a parking lot a few miles from her house. When she slid into his car, she felt a mix of excitement and fear. They drove to a quiet Italian restaurant on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where no one would recognize them. The conversation flowed effortlessly, just as it always did. But there was an unspoken tension between them, a magnetic pull neither of them acknowledged. After dinner, Ethan suggested they go for a drive. "There's a spot I know," he said, his voice low and steady. "It's quiet, and the view is amazing." Clara should have said no. She should have ended it right there. But instead, she nodded. The spot Ethan took her to was a secluded overlook with a breathtaking view of the valley below. The stars were out, and the air was crisp. They sat in the car, talking about everything and nothing, until the conversation faded into silence. Ethan turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "Clara," he said softly, "I don't want to ruin what we have, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way about you." Her breath caught in her throat. She knew this moment was coming, but hearing him say it out loud made it real. "I feel it too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. And then he kissed her. It wasn't like the kisses she shared with Daniel, quick, routine, obligatory. This kiss was different. It was full of passion, longing, and a kind of desperation she hadn't felt in years. It was the kind of kiss that makes you forget everything else, even the lines you're about to cross. They didn't stop there. That night, in Ethan's car, everything changed. Clara wasn't going to pretend it was some magical fairy tale moment. It wasn't. But it was real, raw, and intense. For the first time in years, she felt wanted, needed, alive. Ethan made her feel like a woman again, not just a wife or a mother. And at that moment, she didn't care about the consequences. Afterward, as they sat in the quiet of the car, reality began to sink in. Clara stared out at the stars, her heart still racing, and wondered what she had just done. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "I didn't mean to." "Don't," Clara interrupted. "Don't apologize. I wanted this too." But even as she said the words, guilt began to creep in. She thought about Daniel, about their kids, about the life she had built and the promises she had made. And yet, a part of her didn't regret it. Not entirely. Ethan reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "You don't have to feel guilty, Clara. You deserve to feel happy." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that one night could be justified, that it didn't make her a terrible person. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was crossing a line she could never uncross, and nothing would ever be the same. As Clara drove home that night, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She replayed every moment in her head, trying to make sense of what had happened. When she walked through the door, Daniel was asleep on the couch, the TV still on. She stood there for a moment, watching him, and felt a pang of guilt so sharp it made her chest ache. But she also felt something else, something she hadn't felt in years. She felt alive. And that scared her more than anything else. Clara's life became a delicate balancing act. She compartmentalized everything, drawing an invisible line between her life with Daniel and her life with Ethan. There was Clara the wife, the mother, the dependable woman everyone relied on. And then there was Clara the lover, the woman who felt alive and free in Ethan's arms. She was careful, always careful. Daniel never questioned her when she said she was working late or meeting up with friends. He didn't notice when she came home wearing perfume she hadn't left the house in, or when her hair looked a little too perfect after a work event. She had created the perfect alibi, and she stuck to it. But secrets have a way of unraveling, no matter how tightly you try to hold them together. As the months went by, Clara found herself torn between two worlds. She loved Daniel, but she craved the passion and connection she found with Ethan. She knew she couldn't have both, but she couldn't bring herself to let go of either. Now, as she sits in her kitchen, staring out at the autumn leaves, Clara wonders if she'll ever be able to reconcile the two halves of her life. She wants to believe that she and Daniel can find their way back to each other, that the spark they lost can somehow be reignited. But deep down, she's not sure if that's possible. Because once you've tasted something that good, something that makes you feel so alive, How do you ever go back to the way things were before? Clara's story is one of love, loss, and the choices that define us. It's a reminder that life is messy, and sometimes the lines between right and wrong blur. But most of all, it's a story about what happens when we dare to chase the things that make us feel alive, even if it means risking everything we hold dear. So, what would you do if you were in Clara's shoes? Would you stay in the safety of what you know, or would you take the leap into the unknown? The answer isn't easy, but one thing is certain. Once you cross that line, there's no going back.